Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Inside Science, where we discuss a different scientific topic with every video. Now today's video is about a disease that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is Alzheimer's disease. What I'd like to do today is try and give you a better understanding of the disease. So I'll start with the basics. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia worldwide. It affects millions of people. And it all starts in a small area of the brain called the hippocampus. Now you notice the hippocampus is shaped a little bit like a seahorse, which is where it gets its name from. The Greek for seahorse is hippocampus. What's unique to Alzheimer's disease is it starts in the hippocampus and patients lose pretty much their entire volume of hippocampal tissue. Now the hippocampus is more specifically associated with learning and short-term memory, which is why in a patient with Alzheimer's disease, one of the first symptoms is not being able to remember things like what you had for lunch, what you did yesterday, because it's affecting that region of the brain that is so critical in short-term memory formation. And now as the disease progresses, we see degeneration of other regions of the cortex, and this is a very critical area of the brain. It's responsible for things like learning, language, attention, perception, consciousness. It is essentially you. And by the end of it, a patient has lost an average of 140 grams of brain tissue. Just to put that in context, that's about the weight of this apple. And one of the reasons it's still such a prevalent and difficult to treat disease is that by the time a patient starts to show symptoms and gets diagnosed, the damage is already done. Now there are research groups worldwide studying Alzheimer's disease and trying to develop better, more effective therapies and ways of detecting it earlier. And what I'll do is cover that in a separate video to give it its justice, because there's a lot of material to cover there. But what I would like to do now is give you a bit more information as to why we see that loss in tissue, to try and give you a better understanding of the disease itself. Because by understanding the disease, we have a better chance of actioning a better therapy. Now, as with other tissues, your brain is full of millions of cells, and these cells are unique to the brain, so they have their own functions, their own fingerprint. Now the cells in the brain work similarly to wires in an electrical circuit. So one brain cell will connect to another brain cell and fire an electrical signal across what we call a synapse. So that's almost like an electrical junction. So what you have is this very active electrical circuit of cells that are responsible for how your brain functions. Now if you were to ask a neuroscientist what are the main hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, they'll mention two things: plaques of a protein called amyloid beta and tangles of a protein called tau. So let me break that down a little bit for you. So, as I mentioned, the cells in the brain have this sort of connectivity, almost like an electrical circuit. Well, think of these amyloid plaques as a cut in the wire. Essentially, cells within the brain produce a protein called amyloid, but in a healthy patient, it's trafficked out of the brain and into the blood supply. Now, in the case of Alzheimer's disease, this protein is processed in a different way, such that it becomes sticky. It forms big clumps, and these clumps essentially get in the way of cells talking to each other. They lose that connectivity, they die. So these amyloid plaques really are bad news. Now, as I mentioned, the second main hallmark are tangles of a protein called tau. Now, every cell in your body has its own skeleton. We call it the cytoskeleton, and this provides structural support to the cell, and it's full of small, what we call microtubules. Now, tau is a protein that normally associates with microtubules and helps stabilize them. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, you have a mutated form of tau. It loses that function and you get tangles of the protein within the cell, which again leads to death of the cell and loss of neuronal tissue. And it is thought that these two main malfunctions, the clogging of amyloid beta and the tangles of tau, need to coexist in order for a patient to go on and develop Alzheimer's disease. Now there is a lot more to Alzheimer's disease than that. Research is constantly revealing new molecular and cellular mechanisms that can drive this disease forward. So that's essentially Alzheimer's disease in a nutshell. And like I said earlier, I will do a separate video on research into new therapies and diagnoses to try and improve the way we can treat Alzheimer's disease. But in the meantime, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, make sure you click subscribe, click the bell icon so you get a notification whenever a new video goes up. Hit like, leave a comment. Take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you all very soon.